Hi and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Flo and today's video is a September reading wrap up. So this was the month where I finally finished my physical TBR and I was able to read other books as well. I will be posting a video which will be a reading vlog of me finishing my TBR. So those books that I've read, I won't go into them in too much detail, but I'll still feature them in this vlog. For the month of September, I read 19 books as a mix of audiobook and paperback. The first book I read in September was The Way I Used to Be, and I gave it 4 stars. It's a really important read. It has a lot of heavy topics. I would check the trigger warnings, but basically it follows Eden as she starts, I think she starts in middle school and then it goes through each year of her going through high school as well. But at the beginning of the book, she is, I don't know if I can say the word, raped by her brother's best friend in her own family home, and she doesn't tell anyone. The story follows her, like, I guess, grieving process or like dealing with that trauma and how it affects like her relationships with her best friend and then her future romantic relationships with other boys and sort of the culture in high school and kind of how vicious it can be. I didn't give it 5 stars and I don't know the reason why. Maybe because it hasn't, like, you know when you get the 5-star feeling and it like grips you the whole way, like Boys of Tommen is up there on a pedestal for me, so if it doesn't make me feel that same way then it's always a 4-star, so I think that's the only reason really. But it was a really great read. I think it maybe took me longer to finish it than I was expecting or hoping, but I knew it would be emotional and such an important book. I think this is like bread and butter, should be on your TBR if you haven't already read it. And then this next book is a bit of an unexpected 5-star. I had no expectations when going through this book. It follows a 13-year-old called Lenny, and it's about how her mum and her dad move to a remote like area in Alaska, like far away from like normal civilization, to a really small town, if you can even call it a town. There's only like a few people. Like the school she goes to is like a 1-room hut and she has like one other person in her school year. It follows her coming of age and it kind of shows how like the toxic relationship or like the toxic person her dad is as she gets older, and like his issues also with like her trying to navigate a romantic relationship with a boy she meets that's the only other person in her year called Matthew. And it's about how that relationship is just like so beautiful around like loads of other issues and like struggles that the town has. There's just this glimmer of hope in their relationship and I loved their connection so much. It took so many emotional twists and turns which I could not see coming, and I was gripped. I listened to the audiobook of it and I would just stop and listen like mid what I was doing. The ending was just perfect, like the twists at the end, like amazing. I would highly recommend this book. I mean, I don't love the cover of it, right? So when I had this on my shelf, I was putting it off because I was like, I don't think this is up my street, but 10 out of 10 would highly recommend. So this next book, I already discuss it in my summer reading vlog, which is already up. So I won't go into it in too much detail. I don't really give non-fiction books ratings, as I've mentioned before. So I didn't rate this, but it was really interesting to like see Prince Harry's side of like his experience growing up in the royal family and like, I guess like the side of his story that you don't see in the mass media. So yeah, I would recommend it. I feel like it's kind of one of those books you kind of have to read because it's such like on trend with like culture at the moment, and I don't know, but yeah, basically I would say it's one of those must reads. And then the next 3 books I read was the Summer I Turned Pretty trilogy, and I listened to it on audiobook. I gave the first book 5 stars and then I think I gave the others 4-star and 3-star maybe, and that kind of summarizes how I felt. I'd already watched the TV series, the first 2 seasons, so I kind of knew the premise of the first 2 books. But it follows Belly and she's in a love triangle with Conrad and his brother, Jeremiah. So I kind of find that concept weird, how she's in a love triangle with brothers, but that's neither here nor there. I really loved it. I think it was like a comfort read, and the actors in the TV series play the characters in the audiobook, if that makes any sense. So it was really cool hearing their voices on the audiobook. I would say that, like, I think a lot of people say this, they love the first 2 and then the third, like the premise of the plot just is a bit bonkers. and it kind of loses its feel and its like comfort feel, but I still enjoyed it. Like, I read them so quickly. They're not that big books anyway. But I would say the one thing I have an issue with, and I hope they change it in the 3rd series when it's out next year, hopefully, is I would say there's not enough Conrad and Belly scenes in the books, and you're really rooting for, I'm team Conrad, so I wanted to see more of them together, but you really didn't see it. So I hope they show it in the TV series. But a really enjoyable trilogy, and my friend is going to New York in a couple of weeks, so I'm going to make her get me the covers, the US covers, because they're so much prettier than the UK covers. The next book that I read in September is Just One Day by Gail Forman. I gave it 3 stars in total, so again, enjoyed it but wasn't like obsessed with it. It follows a girl called Alison. She's like good girl, good relationship with her parents. She goes on this summer trip with her friends. I think it's like a high school organized trip to Europe. And when she's in the UK, she actually ends up sneaking off with her best friend to go and watch some kind of like underground performance of a Shakespeare play. And she sees an actor there. And then the next day on the train, I think they're on the train back to London, she bumps into one of the actors and he convinces her to go to Paris with him for just one day. They end up falling in love, but then the next day she wakes up and he's not there anymore. And so then the book kind of follows her going through that process of, I guess, rejection. Like, she thinks that she's been rejected and she questions whether they were ever really in love through like the next year of her life. But it also shows her as she evolves and like becomes her own person. It's not really my cup of tea, not really my type of book. I enjoyed it for what it was, but just not my cup of tea, so just 3 stars. And the next book is The One by Claire Frost. It follows the main character called Lottie, and she believes that she's fallen in love and found the one, which is her boyfriend Leo. However, he dies tragically after 3 months of them being together, and so the book kind of takes her through the grieving process and uncovers a few secrets that her boyfriend didn't tell her when he was alive. And so she's kind of dealing with was it really love after 3 months, etc., all those questions you would have. It really felt like Forever Interrupted by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and I love that book. And because I love that book, I felt like this really missed the mark and wasn't as gripping or good, and I didn't feel as connected to the characters in this one as I did with Taylor Jenkins Reid. I think that maybe because I loved that one so much, it meant that I didn't rate this one that high. The next book I read is The Dating Dare, and this was on, again, my summer reading vlog, so I won't go into it too much because I talk about it quite a lot during that video. But I gave it 2 stars. It's a rom-com. I don't love rom-coms. I didn't feel that gripped by the characters, didn't love the plot, read it slow compared to what I would have if I really loved it, kind of had to force myself to get through it. So yeah, 2 stars. The next book I read, which was also on my physical TBR, is This Is How You Heal. I listened to the audiobook as well. I didn't rate it because it's non-fiction, but it has some really useful messages in it, and I would recommend that everybody should read it if this is the kind of non-fiction book that you would find helpful. And then I read I'm Glad My Mum Died, and this is non-fiction and it follows like Jeanette's life, and it's her, I got the audiobook and it's her speaking in the audiobook. I speak about this book on my finishing my TBR reading vlog, which will be posted soon. When I actually finish my TBR, I'm on the last book, so when that is out, you will get my full thoughts and analysis on this book. But much to the same theme, didn't rate it because it's non-fiction and it's someone's real life. But if I could describe this book in one word, I would say intense. This is another book that will be on that TBR reading vlog, so won't spoil it, but I gave it 2 stars. Don't necessarily love this author anyway. So yeah, I will give you my thoughts, but it's a romance. I can't really remember the plot right now, which I guess says everything about my thoughts of this book. It was okay. We're now solidly getting into all the books that are on my TBR reading vlog, so this is another one. Won't spoil it. I gave it 3 stars, and this is just another book in the Lancaster Prep series, which I wasn't fully convinced by anyway because of how smutty it is in a high school setting. I will leave my thoughts in the reading vlog. This is the next book that I read, and it's Things We Left Behind by Lucy Score, and it's the 3rd book in the Knock 'Em Out series, and I feel like everybody is talking about this book at the moment because it was just released. It follows Lucian and Sloane. I gave it 4 stars. I can't remember if I've just said that, so sorry if I'm repeating myself, but I gave it 4 stars. It was my favourite book in the Knock 'Em Out series by far. I loved the tropes in this book. So it was friends to enemies to lovers. Or was it like friends to lovers to enemies to friends to lovers? I don't know. Anyway, it's very up and down with the characters. When they're in their enemy stage, which is what you see in the first 2 books of the series, you don't know why they're not friends or that they don't get along, but you can feel the tension. So it was really nice getting to this book and getting to the bottom of it. There were some like deep traumatic incidents and storylines within this book that kept me gripped, and I loved it, and it was a much easier listen than the other 2 books. I got bored with those, but this one I was really enticed, and I think because there was a bit of an element of like wrapping up the whole big storyline that goes through all 3 books, and then you also got snippets of the characters from the other books, which I liked. And I just really liked Sloane as a character. I loved that she's like a book nerd that works in a library, and I liked that Lucian was a bit like of a darker character compared to the other 2 main male protagonists that you got in the first 2 books. So yeah, 4 stars, my favourite one. I would recommend reading it if you've not already picked it up. And the next book, I got an audiobook, and I got it on my Scribd free trial, which was the cheat sheet, and it's been on my list for ages. And it's a sports romance, and I love sports romance. So it follows Bree and Nathan. Bree is a ballet dancer turned teacher because she got injured, and then Nathan is a star quarterback, a professional football player, and they both live in LA. Normally this would be my absolute like recipe for 5 stars, because you've got sports romance, you've got the fake dating trope. I don't love friends to lovers, but I could deal with it with the fake dating element. I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed listening to it, but the reason that it wasn't 5 stars was because the plot felt a little bit surface level and a bit like comical, whereas I kind of love, like, even with those tropes, like a deep connection to the story. And I felt like some of the problems were like they were just saved with his money. But I really enjoyed it, and I loved all of the characters, and it was a good book, and I finished it within a day, I think, so that's a really good sign. And then another book that I got on audiobook was The Last Letter, and oh my goodness, 5 star, hands down. I am still thinking about this book now. It follows Beckett and Ella. They're the 2 main characters, and Beckett is in the military with Ella's older brother Ryan, and Ryan puts Beckett and Ella in, like, connects them via letters and tells them that they should write to each other while Beckett's in the military, but he uses a pseudonym, so Ella doesn't know his real name, but they have like back and forth communication via letter writing. And Ella's brother Ryan passes away and leaves Beckett a letter to say, please go back to my hometown, my sister will need you, because she's lost her brother, her mum, her grandmother, I think, as well, and she's raising 2 twins as a single mum. And so Beckett goes to the town and gets to know her, but she doesn't know that he is the guy that she was messaging, like, and writing letters to. She believes that he also died when her brother died. So there's lots of twists and turns when he visits, and it is so emotionally gripping. Like, the things you think will happen don't happen, and then something else happens and it guts you. Like, I was sat crying my eyes out as I was listening to this book. It is unbelievable. Absolutely recommend reading this book if you haven't already. If You Were Here is another book that will be on my TBR reading wrap up, but the few things that I will say about this book was I gave it 4 stars, really enjoyed it, really well researched, and so underhyped that if you haven't picked this up already, you really should. It takes you on an emotional twist and turn, but you're also like laughing at the same time. So yeah, a beautifully written book, very well researched, kept me hooked, would recommend. This was a book that for the past year I have been picking up and dropping and picking up snippets, because it's a non-fiction book and it's got like a lot of advice in it. It's not really one you can just sit down and go through, but it is again in my reading wrap up, so I won't say too much, but it's non-fiction, so I didn't rate it. I did end up listening to it in one chunk because I just wanted to finish it, but I think I would refer back to some of the key messages in there, and I would recommend reading it at least once. And the last book I read in September is ACOTAR. This one actually gets its whole own reading wrap-up video, because I am currently on the 2nd book, and that's the last book on my TBR. But then I'm gonna do like a separate fantasy reading vlog, because this is the first fantasy book that I have actually properly picked up, other than the Twilight series, which I don't think counts, and Harry Potter. But those, I read them when I was a kid, so I haven't read fantasy for ages. This book, in one word, I would say, or two words, I would say question mark. I think I need to finish the series before I can give my proper thoughts, hence the separate reading vlog. So definitely check that out when I post it, when I finally get through the ACOTAR series, and I'm including Fourth Wing in that as well. So be sure to watch that to get my full thoughts on this. But the second book, I'm at the end, and oh my God, is all I will say. That wraps up the 19 books that I read in September. Let me know if you've read any of them yourself, and hopefully you'll be able to check out all of the reading vlogs that I mentioned that contain some of my more in-depth thoughts about some of these books. And I will see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.